You're listening to the Art School Geek podcast, episode number 4. Let's get paid to be creative.
This is the Art School Geek podcast. A weird fact about your host, she named her car the Starfighter and refers to it by name. And now, Sidney Reed.
Yes, my car is a black SUV called the Starfighter, although it's taken quite a bit of damage on my morning Kessel run the last couple of months. It's been in a mild hit and run, and then it just got another bumper tap the other day. So, it's a bit dangerous. Good thing those Imperials are paying for all my costs, right? All right, well, speaking of Star Wars and movies, I have 2 special guests with me today that worked in the film industry as storyboard artists. So one was my former own professor for storyboarding, and he's also a good friend of mine. His name is David Rousseau. The other is actually my sister's former professor, Benjamin Phillips. Both of them taught at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and they're here with us today to talk about getting a job as a storyboard artist. They'll go over what you need in terms of education, schooling, skills, and what sort of portfolio you're going to need in order to land that job on a film project. They're also both published authors of the drawing book guide, Storyboarding Essentials, and it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. Makes things very easy, and even if you do know storyboarding, it's just an excellent reference book to go back into to get some inspiration or to polish your already existing skills. So again, I'm going to post that in the show notes in case you guys want to snag a copy for yourself. Now, they have a lot to talk about, so I think we should jump right in. All right, interview with David and Ben. Here we go. Hey everybody, I have with me David Rousseau and Ben Phillips, authors of the book Storyboarding Essentials. Ben and David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, fantastic to be here.
It's great to have you because this episode is going to be pretty near and dear to my heart. Not only did I go to SCAD, and you guys teach there, but also I took David's class back in 2009 when I was still studying.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Time flies.
It does. Eventually I went into the film industry, but I do remember taking that storyboarding class, and that had a huge effect on how I looked at, film, because originally I went in as a comic book artist. So this will be a pretty interesting interview. And on this podcast, my viewers, they love details. So I'd love to ask you guys questions about careers in storyboarding or, related topics like graphic novels and comic books and concept art and things like that. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves and tell us about how you got into this career field?
Sure, Ben, why don't you go first?
Really and truly, I started off while I was in college, just little regional jobs. I went to school for illustration at Virginia Commonwealth, and we had some opportunities. The professors would set up things where they would be regional literary magazines, doing spot illustrations, that type of thing. So really, I got started when I was about 19, just doing sort of odd little jobs here and there. With balancing being a student, trying to work professionally is a little difficult. And actually, the first time I ever did a storyboard, I was still in school. And to be honest, I had no idea what a storyboard was at the time. I would just take jobs and figure them out. And fortunately, the small company I was boarding for, they didn't really know what storyboards were either. So it sort of worked out. And I was scrambling, hitting my professors up with trying to get phone numbers at the time to talk to people that they knew, so I could figure out what on earth I was actually supposed to be doing. So that was sort of my introduction to the professional world in storyboarding. And then I wound up freelancing for a while as a graphic designer right after college. We had taken a lot of design classes as well and continued to do spot illustrations, and then actually decided to go to graduate school. And coming out of graduate school, started being a backup inker for Archie Comics. Met some folks who were working for them, and that got my whole ball rolling. So I freelanced for a couple years after graduate school, mainly doing comic work, a lot of background inking, a lot of technical inking, and doing a lot of actual perspective layout for other artists. So, and got started part-time teaching and wound up falling in love with that. And I've been at that for 11 years now. And recently, just in the past couple years, I've started boarding some independent films, some things that have been shot, some things that wound up not being shot, and writing the book took up a couple years of our lives. So.
Right, Storyboarding Essentials, which is interesting because my sister, she's studying concept art, and I saw that book on her bookshelf, and I could tell her, hey, I know someone who wrote part of this book, and she was completely shocked. So your book is being put to good use.
Great. Glad to hear that. Well, I started drawing around the age of 7 because around that time I had a tumor in my left ear, and that pretty much prevented me from being able to go out and play with the neighborhood kids. I was inside a lot. And drawing for me was a way to have a little bit of escapism, to go about my day and still not worry about not being able to play with the neighborhood kids. So I would tell stories in that process and do little comic strips and the like. And then in 77 or 78, a little film called Star Wars came out, which I think was a milestone for a lot of creative people. And that movie just blew everybody away. Shortly thereafter, there was a TV special. This is back in the day. This is the late 70s. Their VCRs were really expensive, if they existed at all then. And so when the TV special came on, you had to be right there. And so we all sat around the TV watching this making of Star Wars special. And I saw the storyboard illustrations and was completely blown away by that. I didn't know that was a job. You see movie magic and you don't know how it's all put together, but when you see the behind the scenes and you see that, well, that opened up my eyes. And so then I started diving into every behind the scenes book I could get my hands on, every special I could watch, any video trailer add-on at the end of a movie, even if the movie was terrible, I still watched it for the making of. So I got into storyboarding as a way to problem solve with regards to television and film production. And that then led me on a path to graduate school where there weren't concept art majors then. I had to carve out my own MFA, and SCAD was gracious enough to allow me to do that. So that led me on the path to picking up a part-time class here or there. There I met Ben, and we had an opportunity together to co-write Storyboarding Essentials. So that's where we are today.
So it sounds like both of you guys went to grad school, and I went to grad school. In the first episode, I actually explained why I went to grad school, and it was to learn the business side aspect of it. I felt like I had these really strong technical skills, but I didn't know the industry. I just didn't know how to get a job. So would you guys recommend for storyboarding and concept art, would graduate school be necessary, or is this more to keep building up those skills in this day and age?
Well, for me, I mean, really, with the options out there today, I don't know if graduate school is a necessity for the field the way it was maybe even just 5 to 10 years ago. I think that with the ability for artists, a lot of artists who want to get into this move to the West Coast, and obviously there's a lot of different types of continuing education one can pursue out there in Southern California. So I wouldn't say it's a necessity. It's certainly wonderful to have all that studio time.
I would say that as far as the grad school thing goes, you have to kind of understand what you're about and why you're going to graduate school first and foremost. It's not a hard and fast rule of go, don't go. I think what we have is a situation where when you're going to graduate school, understand that when you're there, you're paying for feedback. And you're there for an intense excuse me, you're there for a very intense experience. I think, and I think this is true for a lot of graduate students, that I averaged about 3 hours sleep a night for 2 years, and it was very much a vision quest, especially if you're going into studio art. Is it necessary for a career? No, because as Ben said, there are so many things out there with resources, with the internet, of being able to now go back in and find numerous how-to videos, behind-the-scenes clips, interviews with storyboard artists, interviews with filmmakers. There are more film festivals today than there were 10 years ago. And it's pretty amazing of what is available to people today. So as far as a career building move, grad school is just a matter of personal preference. What really will build your career is your portfolio and the contacts you make. And if you're smart and you choose to go to grad school, you're going to use grad school to make new contacts and make the best portfolio you can possibly create.
All right, and before I ask my next question about just going into undergraduate school, real quick for my audience's benefit, how about we define, I think at SCAD the program's just called sequential art, but let's define graphic novels, storyboarding, concept art, comic books, because it's used for both film and animation and video games too.
Okay, Ben, you want to field that?
Oh, yes. I mean, really and truly, the best explanation for the differences is that storyboards are a communication tool that are used to help plan a production. They're part of a greater thing, and really they're not the finished product. They're a production aid. Whereas, say, your kind of monthly comic book or even a graphic novel is the final statement, and it's usually, well, in this case of graphic novels, oftentimes a singular vision. And with the monthlies, the good old floppies, you still have a very much a more direct vision and a team working towards a finished goal. Whereas, again, that storyboard, it's a production tool. So I think that, to me, that's the key difference, is one's part of a greater whole, and the other, comics, being the finished product.
Yeah, and they also serve very different needs too. Whereas the graphic novel, and Ben, you said a singular vision. I think that's a very good way to put it. That's usually one artist and one writer, or sometimes they're the same person, telling a single story within a single arc. The monthly comics books that's very much team oriented. You have numerous editors, you have a penciler, an inker, a writer, a colorist. Someone separate designs the cover, someone completely different designs the illustrates the cover. But these are narratives. These are story arcs. And what's different about that and, say, concept art, you can do concept art to tell a sequential story, absolutely. But concept art is a way to sometimes get funding for a picture. Sometimes concept art is used to work with a team to decide how they're going to build a set, design a costume, create makeup effects, or build models and props. And with the storyboarding, that's, in a way, kind of none of those, and all of them at the same time. What they have in common, at least between graphic novels and comics versus storyboarding, is that all of the action, unlike concept art, all the action is contained within a panel, and they are told essentially in a moment-to-moment narrative. But storyboards aren't a narrative unto themselves. Hopefully that explains that.
Definitely. So they're pretty different, but anyone going into grad school, what would you recommend the skills that they should bring into undergraduate school, maybe while they're in high school, or for somebody who's transferring out of a different career? What are some really key skills they should focus on to take with them when applying for their first program, either drawing or storyboarding or sequential art in undergrad?
Two things, really, to mind. Two major things that really affect all others as far as drawing skills. And one of those is being able to draw from observation. That's key in your portfolio. If you are applying to an undergraduate school and your portfolio is work that you've copied, that has its place and it helps you understand. But you really need to draw from life. You really need to draw from observation. That helps you with your citing and your measuring. And the other thing that students should really practice on if they're working towards, if they know they're going to go to art school, they know they're going to be illustrators, is perspective. Really nail that down as much as possible, because that's going to be so much of what you're going to encounter in your first couple of years anyways. And the better you are at it, the stronger you are at it, that means you're going to improve as you work with your professors and as you see the work of your fellow students. Ben?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that a portfolio to apply to an undergraduate program is a completely different thing than the portfolio you're going to come out with when you start that job hunt. And David really hit it with observation, being able to not only be able to judge what you see and cite and measure. It really does sharpen your spatial skills quite a bit. And perspective, you can teach that to yourself, because I did it in high school myself. So
yeah, that's true.
Before the internet.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, with How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, of all things.
That's a classic one. I still have my copy of that. I love that book.
I even have a copy.
Yeah, mine's sitting in my office. So
yeah, that one was actually one of the first books that I got also that introduced me to breaking down the figure and drawing in forced perspective and pulling those things out. That's a fun book. That brings back memories.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is focus on compositions. I know that over the years I've seen a lot of student portfolios, and oftentimes I see a lot of wonderful rendering, excellent use of materials, but not a lot of thought to the edges of the image, controlling things like the open spaces around the subjects. So to me, I would say composition. Work on your general sense of design.
I think that's an excellent point, too, because when we start talking about composition, I know that I've seen a lot of transfer portfolios and the like, and you get feedback from students that thought that their work was excellent. But composition can be a make or break if you're either for acceptance or maybe getting a scholarship. When you start to see people that don't understand the use of the picture plane, they center everything, which has its place for certain illustrations. But if everything's centered and it's timid and it's in the middle of the page and no one's thinking about foreground, middle ground, or background, they're not considering rule of thirds. They're not considering dynamic symmetry, these sorts of things. It speaks not to a technical issue, but to a thought issue, that there wasn't a consideration for how the artist, the illustrator, is leading the eye around the page in terms of movement. They just throw it on the page, call it a day, and think it's beautiful. But design is a key factor. Using those elements of design and principles of organization as you draw is necessary. They do not live in a vacuum.
So I think I can, I definitely understand that, because when I first started transitioning from comic books, which is very two-dimensional, and having a background in just illustration and painting, and then moving into film directing, which is completely three-dimensional, that storyboarding class in between was really essential to making me think in 3 dimensions. So for a lot of my listeners right here, they might just want to be storyboard artists. If they work with a director who's thinking more in 3D, do you recommend that these artists take a film class to try and understand it, or take a second class like in music or audio to try and add to that skill set?
That's a good question. And since this is really, this discussion really gears towards people who are looking at art school, yes, you should try and broaden your experience. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a film class. You could take a photography class and understand what depth of field is. And if you have an outstanding instructor, that instructor is going to be able to look at your artistic work and start to talk to you about dynamic composition, foreground, middle ground, background, rules of thirds, as I mentioned before. Photography class is an excellent one. And if you are attending a school that doesn't have a film major, but you know you love storyboarding, look around and see if you can get a PA gig on a set somewhere and just observe what's happening around you. You don't necessarily have to be right next to the director to know how a film set operates. Being on the set and watching how they light things, being on the set and watching who's doing what is going to help you for practical experience as a storyboard artist as well.
And for my viewers, it might seem a little extreme, like, oh, I have to go work on a film set. But I'm just going to say right now, when you go to an art school and there's a film program, they'll love to have you on set. Trust me, you just have to talk to some students, and they'll be more than happy to have you on set. It's not there's that mystery of movie magic, and I could never work on a film set. So you just have to make friends with the film department and go ask around and learn. And yeah, I'm pretty sure they'll be more than happy to have a storyboard artist on set, because you make some connections and you start networking.
Yeah, they will. They would love to have the storyboard artist on set. And by the way, since we're on that particular subject, if you are working with a student project and you're doing the storyboards for a student film, that is a great way to start. But make sure that you get to keep your storyboards. Make sure that you get to use those for your portfolio. Make sure that you have the permission to use those for your portfolio so that you have something to brag about. And make sure you're really good friends with that director so that you can get a copy of that reel and maybe use stills from that alongside the storyboards that you created.
Yeah, definitely. Because, seeing it on paper, sometimes the director, it's an interpretation. But yeah, if you show your work drawn and then show what your drawing created, that's really great for your portfolio. And are there other things? You said going into school, there's a certain portfolio that you want to have. So coming out of it, what sort of items should you put in order to start the job hunting process?
Ben?
My advice usually, especially if you're coming out and you're interested in entertainment, whether that's going into the film industry, doing things in the animation field or gaming, is be willing to have a couple of portfolios and always customize. I know for me, I always enjoyed freelancing, but it meant keeping about 3 or 4 different portfolios to show off different skill sets. The thing I would say now, beyond just having a good set of maybe 3 storyboards, just samples, would be either have the ability to do isometric perspective, so you can do obliques and turnarounds for 3D artists, or some basic 3D skills even. Doesn't hurt, especially with everything moving heavily towards previs, to have some 3D skills and maybe even a little demo reel.
Yeah, I would agree on that one. The technology end of it is really, really important on the 3D end of things, even if it is just, isometric. Being able to be versatile is really important too. Like Ben said, multiple portfolios. I have a design portfolio, an illustration portfolio, and a concept art storyboarding portfolio. They're very different. And they serve different purposes. What people are going to want to look at when you're in the field is your portfolio. If you're a storyboard artist, have your storyboards, a couple samples in a series, but also perhaps a couple of keyframe illustrations that are very well rendered. And have a mix of boards too, some that are well rendered, some that are loosely sketched. And one thing in my experience of talking with industry professionals, people like Rick Sternbach or Peter Woolley have had the opportunity to speak with both of those gentlemen in grad school, was and other people like Will Vinton Studios. These professionals want to see your sketchbooks. So if you don't have a sample of your sketchbooks in your portfolio, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. if you're not sketching on a regular basis, and it doesn't have to be a finished sketch, go to the mall, go to the park, just sketch. Just go get out there, bring a sketchbook and sketch all the time. Because these professionals who are hiring you to do this high-end work, they're trusting you with their vision, and they want to know how you think. And the sketchbook, just a couple of excerpts from a sketchbook in your portfolio will go a long, long way to show them how you process information, how quickly you can communicate an idea with a few simple strokes of a pen.
And with this work, in the job hunting process, I think my audience might be kind of interested to know, is this going to be mostly freelance work, or can you be hired by a studio to work full-time on an upcoming film or in any animations?
Normally, there's a kind of a difference between freelance and contract work. Mm-hmm. And freelancing, usually it's not a long-term commitment. Oftentimes you're either charging like a daily rate or by the board. A contract job is usually for a set period of time or until the production's completed. I know the animation industry especially works a lot on contract jobs, and that's why you see a lot of storyboard artists sort of hop from one animation house to another a lot, because that contract, the production ends, and they've moved on to the next thing. So there's a little bit of a difference there. I know some gaming houses keep some storyboard people in-house, and I know the TV animation industry from season to season tries to keep people in-house.
Yeah, and the other thing, and all that's a good point, contract versus that. And I'm speaking generally with this next comment, by the way, but when you're looking at contract versus per job, contract is a lot longer term. The per job ones tend to be for shorter projects like animation and these sorts of things. For commercials rather. The animation ones, or the in-house ones, the longer term ones, because the storyboard artist with a series animation anyways is very much like the director. They're setting the keyframes. They're determining the pace of the show in the way that the director would. So they have a little more control over the process than a storyboard artist working on the set of a film, for example, who was just hired on as a day player.
Right. And so depending on, it sounds like which industry you're in, your daily work schedule might be different. So take us through a day of working as a storyboard artist. Let's say they like your portfolio, they like you. Would you go into the studio and start talking with the director or the team, or do you work from home? Do they give you an assignment? Just kind of what a day-to-day job working like this would be.
In my experience, I've always been remote. I've dealt with everything from directors who have a very specific shot list, which does speed things up. Obviously, you don't have anywhere near as much input. But I've never really been in a position where I needed to be on set as far as doing storyboards. Oftentimes it's so far in advance of actual production. For the shows I've worked on, that there's been no need. And oftentimes I see the results quite a bit later. Yeah,
I've had the same thing. A lot of the storyboard gigs I've gotten have been remote. There's one or two jobs I've had I never met the director. It was always on the phone or Skype or just emailing images or sometimes inboxing on Facebook, just back and forth. And a lot of times it was just very quickly sketched, nothing finished. They just want to be able to turn that around. The exceptions to the fast sketch nature of storyboards tend to be when you're trying to go for funding and you create a series of boards to show investors that, yes, you do have a clear vision. Yes, you do have a way of seeing this project through to completion, and it allows them to understand the abstract nature of that, of the written word to the visual. They can see where this is going to go. As far as going into a studio and going on set, that's increasingly rare these days, although Ben and I have both had students who have been on the set as a storyboard artist. Ben, you had Whitney Cougar, who worked with Robert Redford, right?
Yes, she did when they shot The Conspirator here in town, in Savannah, Georgia. So,
Yeah, and she was right next to Robert Redford the whole time.
yeah, she was saying she actually mentioned it was strange to talk about Bob.
Oh, first name basis.
Apparently, he is a very relaxed set and is a very open person to the whole process. And I know I've got we have several alumni who have moved in to places like Warner Brothers Animation, and they go in and work in house every day. You know, they kind of, it depends on, the closer they get to actually needing to be done, they work longer days, but a lot of their days are actually sort of 9 to 5 days. It just depends on how close deadlines get, whether or not those become longer days.
And that's something to consider too, is if you're wanting to say, oh man, that's what I want to work for Warner Brothers, or I want to work for one of these larger animation houses, Film Roman or something like that, you better be prepared in going to art school and going to, if you choose to go to graduate school, to spend the overwhelming majority of your time drawing, and you better love it, because there's always going to be someone out there who's better than you, and the only thing that separates you from them is how much time you're putting into it and your passion for the work.
And then for oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say yes. I'd have to definitely agree. If you don't, it is not a field if you don't enjoy drawing.
Yeah, it definitely is not, and it will show. Your portfolio will demonstrate your love of drawing, and it'll show the care and the time you put into it. And not only that, so will your attitude when you go in front of somebody. If you love the work, if you love the craft of drawing and storyboarding, you sit down across from somebody, they're going to ask you these questions. They're going to ask you about your love of the game. And if you're not enthusiastic about it, they're going to be able to tell that. And they're going to be able to tell that you're not going to have the energy it takes to put in many cases, 12, 16-hour days as deadlines draw closer.
And as they go along, is there, just curious, because I'm not sure about this part actually, since a lot of it is freelance, but if they're working in-house, is there a career ladder to climb? Like, do you start as an assistant drawing and then you move up to a lead or manager?
Ooh, good question.
In animation, oftentimes the entry-level job in TV is something called cleanup and revision, which means it's not glamorous work. It means you're going back over other people's storyboards and making sure the characters are on model. So especially shows that get shipped out from maybe to Canada or South Korea, those boards need to be pretty tight, and oftentimes that's the job of the cleanup and revision artist. I know personally one of my mentors, Ted Stern, who started off as a story artist board artist on Beavis and Butthead. He actually was at the college that I was attending for a while as a faculty member, and he went back into the field and he moved up into animation supervision, as well as being story supervisor, and actually wound up directing various episodes of many long forgotten short-lived cartoons. So oftentimes in the animation field, it's the story artist who kind of do make their way up, oftentimes to direct. Actually, several of Pixar's directors started off in their storyboard teams.
Yeah, that is true. One note Pixar reminded me, one thing that you really got to have, and I know that so many people who are artists tend to be kind of sensitive folks. And I think that it's important for people who are sensitive and know they're sensitive to do everything they can to engage with others and interact with others and learn to take feedback and ask for it, seek it, take the beating, if you will. And not to be masochistic in any stretch of the way, but just to really start to understand that people in the entertainment industry are going to be brutally honest. They do not have the time to, and for many people, they feel that they don't have the time to be polite. They're not going to hold your hand and pat you on the back. That's something you have to expect. In Pixar, and the reason why I thought of this was I was watching a documentary on Pixar that talked about their daily meetings. And the whole point of these daily meetings was for them to get together, and they may have all worked really, really hard the day before and gotten maybe 30 seconds of animation out there for the next day. And they're watching that 30 seconds to 2 minutes of animation, and then they stop the footage. And at that point, they look at the team and they say, "Okay, let's tear this up. Let's." and they're really assertive about it, and in some cases aggressive. And they go into those meetings knowing full well that the thing they just spent 8 or 10 hours of their life on the day before is going to be ripped to shreds. And they don't do it to be mean. They don't do it to weed people out, to weed out the weak ones. They don't do it. What they do that for is to tell the absolute best story they can. So if the timing isn't exactly right, if the facial expression is off, if the camera angle isn't working, if the emphasis was on one character but supposed to be on another one, if the framing height wasn't exact, if it was too far out, too close, all these things come together. That needs to be addressed before you go any further with that story and spend millions of dollars for something that could bomb at the box office. Every detail has to matter, and you have to be able to embrace that kind of criticism and accept it as a part of your professional duty.
I think that was a really good topic to talk about, because I did have it marked down because, I know, when you do art isn't just maybe science. It's not just fact. It's something that comes from within you. When you're creative, it's your vision and something you have in your mind that you want to share with everyone. And for someone to tear that down, it can be really tough, especially, when you're younger. And over time, you kind of build up a skin, but when you're young, this is like everything to you. This is the career you picked. And sometimes I remember even in your class taking storyboarding, some of those critiques people didn't take really well, but really there's no other way to improve other than find the things you didn't do right and make it better.
That's true. And, it really helps if I know that when I teach this, and Ben does too, if you have a rubric, if you have a list of standards that are supposed to be met for each and every project, the professional world, the real professionals will have those standards too. They're not going to hold your hand, but they will say, we expect these dimensions, this image, this framing, so on and so forth. They will explain these things, what they need. Your job is to interpret that and give them something back better than they expect. But in school, if you have availability to get your hands on a rubric, if you have an opportunity to look at the grading criteria, and before you even sit down to draw a stick figure, before you even do that, read that rubric, read those grading criteria. If there are other examples from other students, look at those before you begin. Because then along the way, you can start asking yourselves questions. Did I meet these criteria? Okay, based on this rubric, this grading scale, was this excellent or exemplary, or was this marginal? Where do I fall on that spectrum, and what does it take to be exemplary in this particular project? Not every professor provides you with that, but if they have it available to you, take advantage of it before you begin, and then consider that a way to improve your way of working with others.
And a follow-up question to that, this is for both of you guys. What were your struggles when you first started in the industry? Maybe not criticism, but what did you personally find really difficult when you first started off?
For me, it was networking. I had a lot of at the time, from coming out of an undergraduate school, a good portfolio. I had a lot of skills, a lot of enthusiasm. It was meeting people. I again, I graduated school in the art school in the 90s, late 90s. And so you didn't really there wasn't a big career resource center or anything where I was going. So for me, the toughest part was meeting people, and it was footwork. I would drop off. I was living in Richmond, Virginia, and there were several. There was a small publisher and 2 ad agencies, and about every month I was dropping off new samples to both of them. And that's really, at the time, I had to do a lot of footwork and just trying to meet people, to get work, to get my portfolio looked at. This was, again, right at the cusp before it was very easy to have a website. And then I started going, at the time I wanted to work in the comic industry, so I started going to those comic book conventions and trying to get those portfolio reviews. That was my biggest challenge, was meeting people and finding the people to meet.
And do you think it's a little bit easier, especially with Facebook and all these other resources, especially, having an online portfolio?
Yes, I think it's easier to be a presence in a community. I also think that there's more kind of focused events now, like a Creative Talent Network exposition out in Burbank every November. Also, a lot of colleges are doing a lot better job about career recruitment and bringing in human resource recruiters. That would be one thing, as especially for high school students looking at programs. Find out who's visiting those programs, find out who's recruiting out of them, and who you're going to have a chance to show your skills off to, because that was my big struggle right after art school.
Yeah, the networking thing is a skill set in and of itself. Because while Facebook and other forms of social media can get your name out there in terms of being a presence within a community, as Ben said, it can also cause you grief because people don't just look at your portfolio online. If they're serious about working with you, they're going to start taking a look at your Facebook page and what you post as being public, the language that you use when you talk about others. If someone who's an industry professional is going to your Facebook page, and you're claiming to be this great storyboard artist, but you don't have any of your work there, you don't talk about art, you don't talk about film, what you're talking about is what you ate for dinner last night and how awful your date was the night before. And then you start trashing a former colleague in a public forum, they're not going to hire you. That's just not going to happen. And the reason for that is there's trust. Storyboarding is all about trust. Someone's coming to you and said, we have this script. We don't want you to talk about it. We have a team that we're working in. We don't want you to speak badly of us. There's a lot of pride on the table. There's a lot of money on the table here. We want you to be a professional. And we want to know that you can take this written word and create a series of drawings within a specific aspect ratio that we can turn out to the rest of the team. And if they sense through online social media and networking that you are a trash talker and you're not professional and you don't have a passion for it, it doesn't matter what your game is in front of them. They're going to break that down pretty quickly and realize that you're not really a team player. You don't have their back and they can't trust you. So the social media is a double-edged sword. In networking, we've all been to events where someone comes up and all they're doing is really talking about themselves. All they're doing is talking about themselves. If you're going to, say, for example, a film festival and you manage to go to the film festival, you watch the movies, and you get to a mixer and you get a chance to talk to the director, the first thing out of your mouth should be, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm a storyboard artist. Here's my card." No. The thing coming out of your mouth should be, "Hey, I really like your film and I really love the way that you compose these shots. That's really amazing. Tell me about why you made those selections." And start showing an interest in the people that you want to talk to. Let them talk about themselves for a little while, because after a certain moment, they'll be talking to you. That's really, hey, thanks for that feedback. What is it that you do? And that's your opportunity, not before. Because if they're not going to ask you what you're into before you hand them the card, and you hand them the card anyways, that card's going to be on the floor or in the trash. They're going to forget about you. Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, I was about to say, I tell the story of when I worked at GameStop in Burbank.
Mm-hmm.
I specifically picked that job because I knew people who came into the game store would be really relaxed. You don't go in there for business, you go in there to relax. And it was really great because as a salesperson, your only job is to find out what that person wants and needs. So I always tell everyone it's amazing working as a sales retail person because you learn to go up to people and dig up information from them and figure out what they're interested in, what they like. And it's just really great training to get you to open up and talk to people and give them a chance to talk so you can listen.
Oh, absolutely. Any job that you can get, any opportunity that you can get to just listen, any customer service job has nothing to do with storyboards. Well, what it has to do with is your ability to communicate with others and show respect and be patient with difficult people. And that is a good way for shy people to toughen up a little bit, even if it has nothing to do with art, just dealing with others. My biggest challenge out of school, and it's an existential question. I still deal with this every single day, is really truly figuring out where my passions are. I love everything. And so, I draw, I write, I make films, I do all kinds of crazy things. I teach. I do all these things, and I act, and they're all passions of mine. And so the thing that I struggled with out of school was, well, which direction am I going to go in? Am I going to be laser focused on this, or am I going to be more generalist and look at all these things together? There's a place for both of those, by the way. You don't have to. The thing I discovered and the thing I've become more comfortable with as I get older is being comfortable with the notion that you can be a Renaissance person. You can be a generalist. There's a price to pay for each side of that, though. Someone who is incredibly focused and specific will be known in their field as the content expert, without question. But they may miss out on other opportunities that would enrich their lives overall. Someone who's a generalist may have a richer life overall, but there will be a point in the career where they may not be taken as seriously as someone who's laser focused within that specific field, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it sounds like the trick is somewhere right in between there, some unknown value.
Some unknown value, but you have to know it for yourself. You can't do it to please other people because someone told you need to go into this field. You need to go into that field. Oh, don't do that. You'll never make a living. And quite honestly, if someone does tell you, well, don't do that because you'll never make a living, and you believe that advice, then you were never going to be in that field anyways, because you're not going to have what it takes when someone knocks you down.
I think that was a really great piece of advice. Ben, do you want to leave one really good, solid piece of advice for anyone listening?
Really? It's learn to take notes. I can't overstate how important that is. I think that it's a habit you can start developing very early in life, but you can start picking it up anytime because it's something you're going to need to do professionally. And I'm not talking about necessarily the kind of notes you take in an academic class. I mean notes on especially collaborative efforts, and especially for students who are interested in the arts and maybe just starting off their career or their schooling. Especially in school, it's a great time to learn to start taking notes during critiques, not just art history class. Because notes, again, like David was saying earlier, and in one sense, it's all the information you need. When he was speaking about rubrics earlier, those notes you take, that includes basic things like aspect or number of shots. It's all the information you need, because even though while yes we can all be relatively connected pretty quickly, people are busy and you can't count on getting immediate answers from people. And your notes, and part of that's learning to ask questions and being honest about when you don't understand something.
Yeah,
so that's. Yeah.
That is excellent advice there. I mean, taking the notes is the one thing, but also restating them back to the person that gave them to you, and especially in a client relationship. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I need what you need from me is X, Y, and Z by this date. Is that correct? Great. Anything else that I need? Oh, well, thank you. I'll get that for you. Yeah. That's taking the notes is one part of that equation, but providing them back with that feedback is step two. That's a great point, Ben.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a difference between getting into the business and staying in the business.
Yes, very true. And that's true with any field.
Almost half will be technical skills, but then personality, work ethic, just like in any job, that's a huge, huge part of being successful as an artist.
Yes, absolutely. You've got to be able to be a professional, respect people's time. You want your time respected, so it stands to reason that you would respect the time of other people, especially those who are paying you.
All right. Well, I think we're just coming close to our hour mark. So thank you guys so much for coming on to this show. I think my listeners are just going to love this inside look into the film industry. I know sometimes if you haven't worked in the field yet, or if you're kind of young, because a lot of my listeners are going to be thinking about going to art school, it can be kind of confusing about what expectations from school or employers or things like that are. So I think you guys really washed away that cloak of mystery behind storyboarding in the film industry.
Well, thanks. And of course, it goes without saying that people who are interested in storyboarding, go ahead and pick up a copy of our book. Ben and I worked really, really hard to make this accessible to an introductory level for filmmakers and artists alike. So that people really understand what these terms are in storyboarding. It's more than pretty pictures. It's something that everyone could benefit from, and a good, safe way for people to figure out if this is something that suits their goals and dreams.
And if they want to pick up a copy, where can they actually get that?
IndieBound, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, iBookstore. And of course, from Random House's website as well. You can even download it in digital media for your Kindle or your iPad, so you can have a digital version.
Ah, look at that! The new age of drawing digital.
Yep, absolutely.
And for everyone listening, I'll have that posted in the show notes so that you guys can check it out and pick up your copy because. I've looked through my sister's copy, and you guys have done a really good job of making it very easy to follow and definitely very catered towards modern artists as well. So it's pretty awesome, guys.
Great, thanks.
Oh,
and
thank you.
Yeah, for your listeners out there, I have to tell everybody that we mentioned this in the pre-show. But Sidney is a fantastic artist in her own right, and I still use many of the works that she submitted to me for student work as examples for other students to follow. So it's withstood the test of time.
So trust me, these guys know what they're talking about.
Well, thank you, Sidney, so much. Really appreciate being on your show.
Yeah, thank you guys
Thank
so
you.
much. All right, and I wish you guys the best of luck on your book and see what you guys have in store for the future.
Great. Thanks, Sidney. Take care.
All right, you too.
Thank you.
Sidney here post-interview. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Ben and David. I think they had tons and tons of information to share. So the interview ran a little long, but I also think it's important for you guys to hear those details and always hear straight from the professor about what you need in your portfolio to get that art scholarship or just get into art school and then go land that job as a storyboarding artist or an illustrator. I'll post everything you need in the show notes. Just go to artschoolgeek.com/podcast4. That's the number 4. And if you want to reach out to them, I'll have some other links as well. Thanks again for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me through email or social media. You can follow me on Facebook. I have a group posted. And I think what I'm going to start doing is for the people who want to join that Facebook group, I'm going to post job links and scholarships that I find. That way you guys have first dibs on it and you don't have to go around and hunt for it yourself. So definitely go there. I'm going to make it a resource page so you can maybe find a job in painting, illustrating, film sets, animation, things like that. All right, leave a comment on the podcast page if you have the chance. That helps me convince more people to come on to the show. All right, guys, that's all for this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Art School Geek podcast. For show notes and more, check out the blog at www.artschoolgeek.com.